Good morning, everybody. Molweni, sanibonani, absheni, dimatekwane. Hello, Isis. Those that speak Nama properly will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm trying my best. Today is the 24th of September, 2021. We are celebrating the International Heritage Day. Here in South Africa, this day means a lot to us because we're a diverse society. The theme of this year is importance of language in nation building and heritage preservation. It means that our languages are part of our heritage. Our heritage meaning ubuntu bethu, ingcambu zethu, inkaba yethu, ubutyebi bethu, imvelaphi yethu. All that is what makes us proud South Africans because of our diversity. So you are welcome today. But before I say you are fully welcomed, let me allow Dr. Bongani Ndlovu, who is the Executive Director of Core Functions in Iziko Museum, to do the official welcoming. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mali, for such a warm welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, good morning. In decolonizing the mind, Ngungu Watong sees language as a transmitter and a tool for heritage preservation. In this assertion, he is supported by a number of scholars, including writers such as Dipizat Ntuli, S.E.K. Mqai, Herbert Vilakazi, and a number of them, not to go exhaustively on the list. A number of thought leaders, cultural activists, linguists have argued very strongly that embedded in language are also technologies for social and economic development. Today, our panel will take us through these and other issues. Join me and our partners in warmly welcoming our panelists today. And on behalf of our partners and Iziko Museums of South Africa, I also extend warm words of welcome to all of you. I say Namukelegile. Thank you.
Siyabonga Ntate Ndlovu. Thank you very much for welcoming everybody. And I hope that everybody now will participate and will feel free to be part of the program. Without taking much time, our next speaker is Ms. Deirdre Jantjies. She will introduce her topic and proceed with her presentation. Over to you, Ms. Deirdre.
Great, sis, and Gonkia. Thank you so much for having me here today. I am very excited to introduce myself as I'm Deirdre Jantjies. I'm a cultural activist and a storyteller. I specifically focus on Indigenous stories of our Koina heritage. And so I started with the first story called Stories in Event, that goes on or speaks of a young girl that goes on a journey to find herself and also to celebrate her calling. She is called by her ancestors to save her people in the future. And she becomes sort of the leader amongst her people to save her land from the drought that comes. So I think Stories in Events sort of sparked a lot of identity, and it became a tool to sort of tell stories, Indigenous stories that has been forgotten, to also start acknowledging the Koina people of Southern Africa, and to also just create a platform for itself. Stories in Event has also sort of opened gateways to different places and spaces in Africa to present and preserve and highlight that we should be acknowledging our heritage and present our stories by ourselves, with ourselves, and to celebrate ourselves. So I'm excited for Stories in Event and to present it here. I'm very, very excited to let children, because I believe that Stories in Event is also an access for us to present to our children in schools, to present in our tertiary institutions, and also to just have adult conversations, intergenerational conversations between our older generation and also our younger generation. So yeah, that is Deirdre Janchis. What else can I say? I think also it sparked the conversation of language, which we should be acknowledging as well. Our Koina, our new language, and our Khoikhoi Gabaf language, which are also used as subtitles in this film, to spark conversation and for us to start acknowledging that the language still lives among us, and also in our language, it's part of our DNA, it's part of our heritage, it's part of our history. And yeah, that is me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yankees, for your presentation. We will engage when we've also allowed other speakers to share their presentations and their talks. So that's when we'll get more information about this interesting work that you're doing. Quite interesting indeed, and it's a very rare skill for children's literature to be written in Nama. We're really looking forward to that literature development. That is one of our key roles as South African Language Board as well. Our next speaker is Mr. Quintin Williams. He will introduce himself and also do his share of presentation. Over to you, Say.
Thank you very much. That was beautiful, Deirdre, and I wanted to know more. Hi, I'm Quintin Williams, Director of the Center for Multilingualism and Diversity Research at UWC. So I've written a few notes to, and to speak to CARPS, which comes from that rich language that you just hinted at, Deirdre, and the way that you used. We know that CARPS is a language, and I stress here language and not a dialect of Afrikaans, because it is a system of signs governed by rules and used by community speakers. And currently we are codifying CARPS into a dictionary. I am leading the first trilingual dictionary of CARPS for elaboration in society, and to also to develop it into a language of teaching and learning, because CARPS is also one of the oldest languages in our country, developed from the 1500s. But of course, as we know, it is a language born out of the disempowering conditions of colonialism and apartheid. Now, as a consequence of colonialization and the standardization processes of Afrikaans, we know it was a language first used by the indentured indigenous and then enslaved populations. At the time, there was a high probability, of course, at the Cape, that CARPS speakers, mostly enslaved, developed the language as a result of language contact and change. And of course, the Cape was very multilingual from the late 1500s. And this sort of mixing or language contact and change occurred with languages such as the Ku and San languages. So beautifully came out of the mouth of Deirdre there, and we appreciate it. And of course, a smattering of others from across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Madagascar. Then, of course, at the Cape, colonial trade languages such as Creole, Portuguese, and Bazaar Malay was well in use, followed by Arabic, given an increase in the enslaved Muslim population. So from this rich multilingual milieu, we see the emergence first of CARPS as a form of vernacular, form of Dutch under the influence of English, and then followed by of its erasure through the standardization of Afrikaans. We all know, of course, apartheid ensured the reduction of the agency and voice of CARPS speakers under the racialized project of the white Afrikaner nationalism, and then the systematic racial suppression and intended erasure of the language. our nation was poorer then in its wealth and its coherence. But in spite of all of this, Kaap's became a resistant language, and from this symbolic stance followed for decades calls for the reinvention of our multilingualism for the sake of our heritage and for sake of progress in our nation. And specifically for the inclusion and access of Kaap speakers to institutions in our society. Now, this rich Creole history and origins of Kaap's speak to the current future of our nation. And it falls upon us to transform this language, as with other languages, into a language of teaching and learning in our schools and in our universities to permanently empower the speakers. This will sustain our nation's multilingualism and identity. And the way that we can proceed with this, I would like to propose here 3 points that it goes as follows. Firstly, if we advance to develop Kaap's as a language of teaching in a very real practical way, this needs to be reflected in our language policies so that we can include Kaap's in a constructive way in our basic education and university education system. What this will do is to begin to sustain the language and its speakers in our schools and universities. But we have to do so not as part of an immersion program to satisfy a monolingual idea of multilingualism, but rather as a matter of developing academic literacy in Kaap's. This would require, of course, an intensive training of future teachers and teaching and teaching materials or translation materials, and also learning efforts on the part of academics and staff and students invested in Kaap's as a language of teaching and learning. Secondly, we have to transform the linguistic landscape of our communities and institutions, because, you know, if you look across the Cape Flats, there's very little Kaap's, or even in our institutions, and that speaks to the value that we ascribe to Kaap's. So we have to transform the linguistic landscape to raise awareness of the lived realities of speakers of Kaap's. And then if we do so, we represent not only the multilingualism of Kaap speakers, but also the social life of multilingualism in many Kaap's communicative contexts. And let me end on this last point. We need to include Kaap's in our basic education system, university system, especially in the curricula, so that we can teach abstract and decontextualized knowledge through Kaap's. And we should develop functional learning environments, draw on the bilingual and multilingual repertoires of Kaap speakers, and take advantage of the didactic capital that Kaap's bring to a classroom, or rather Kaap's learners bring to the classroom. If we do this, we will challenge negative and essentialist attitudes towards the knowledge systems that spring from the socio-cultural experiences of Kaap's and its speakers. And overall, our nation will be richer if we capitalize on the linguistic wealth of Kaap's and its speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. That's a quite information for us. You know, when you mention the 3 aspects of ensuring that the language takes its space in the academic field, language policy, language of teaching, developing or even creating a space for teacher training, it means that we'll be really decolonizing the curriculum itself. And that means a lot for our heritage. This is really suitable and relevant for today, that we are tracing back our roots, and our heritage means that our languages should appear there at the top of the ladder. This is a very great work, and we wish to support you as PENSAB as well. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing this presentation. Our next speaker is Ms. Ria Oliver. She will introduce herself, and she's one of the veterans when you talk about language activism. Welcome, Mayor Ria Oliver. Please take the podium. You can unmute yourself.
Good day, Chair Lady, Dr. Mfundumali. What I did was that I sent to Ezekiel a voice recording. So Alan will probably be able to tell us. They were going to play it here. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ria Oliver, and I am a project manager of the Afrikaanse Taalraad / Afrikaans Language Council. The Afrikaans Language Council exists in terms of Section 185 of the South African Constitution, which makes provision for organizations to protect and promote the cultural, religious, and language rights of communities. The Afrikaans Language Council is registered with the CRL Commission. Thank you, Ezekiel Museums and partners, for the privilege to be part of this discussion, highlighting the importance of language in nation building and heritage preservation, or in celebration of Heritage Day. The National Strategy for Developing an Inclusive and Cohesive South African Society defines nation building as follows, and I quote, "The process whereby a society of people with diverse origins, histories, languages, cultures, and religions comes together within the boundaries of a sovereign state. The process of coming together goes hand in hand with the process of creating social cohesion. The national strategy describes social cohesion as, and I quote again, the degree of social integration and inclusion in communities and society." In light of the theme of our discussion today, one is confronted with the question, how can diverse languages play a meaningful role in building unity and ensuring that we as citizens become a unified nation? The reality is that people speak different languages. So what is to be done to ensure the success of the nation building project? Well, I think it is imperative that the use of all our languages in all domains of society should be a key priority. The reason being that language and identity are intertwined. Your language forms part of who you are. So, recognizing and using people's languages in areas that matter, make them feel part of the bigger picture, in this case the South African nation, and encourages them to accept co-ownership of the strive for nation building. The next pertinent question is, how can the use of all our languages be actively promoted in order to realize the dream of unity in diversity? I am of the opinion that we, and by we I mean state and parastatal institutions as well as civil society, should make the use of all languages a key priority. The Constitution clearly stipulates the responsibility of the state to put practical and positive measures in place for the use and the raising of the status of the historically marginalized languages. There should therefore not be any situation or context where people are excluded on the basis of language. All our languages can and must be promoted in various ways. For example, by including these languages in the school curricula, by appointing multilingual frontline staff, by making provision for translating and interpreting, by using all our languages as languages of instruction, by promoting creative writing in all our languages, etc., etc. You name it. We should do everything in our means to ensure that people's languages are included. For failure to do so will fail the nation-building project. That is how serious this is. Our diverse languages also play a key role in preserving the heritage of communities and thus the collective heritage of our country. That is why statutory bodies were instituted to ensure the equal advancement of all our languages, and rightly so, because our languages, also those regarded as historically minority languages, are used to convey ideas, value systems, and beliefs, also religious beliefs of the various language communities. And of course, without language, it would not have been possible to gather information and knowledge spanning various fields and to transfer this from one generation to the next. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that language itself forms part of our heritage, which is transferred from one generation to the next. Our heritage languages should therefore be regarded as living heritage to be protected, promoted, and transferred between generations. We owe it to ourselves, our ancestors, and future generations. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Oliver, for that presentation, and also the reference to all the legislations that endorses the right for our official languages and heritage languages. That was very important to touch that part of legislation. Our next speaker is Mr. Mohammed Jabba, who is from DEFSA. I will allow the interpreter to indicate if he's ready. Over to you, Mr. Mohammed.
Good day everyone. Happy Heritage Day. I'm sure that you are all waiting on having a braai later on after this webinar. Okay, thank you everyone for inviting me to represent DEFSA. My name is Jabal Mohammed, and I'm the Provincial Director of Western Cape, DEFSA Western Cape. I would just like to share, just in terms of our community, we can't speak for ourselves. As an organization, we need to work together. And as deaf people's representatives, we all work together. We cannot work by ourselves, but we're working together. Just to inform you on the timeline as to what has happened to deaf people in South Africa and how we have lobbied for South African Sign Language to be the official language in South Africa. We are talking about years back, since I was a child till adulthood. You will see that there are members like Annette, who is here, Humphreys, who is here. She's one of the members who's been an activist for South African Sign Language to be official years ago. And prior to DEFSA's name, we were the South African National Council for the Deaf. And it was run by hearing people in that time. And in 1994, it was changed to the Deaf Federation of South Africa, of meaning we are all together with our communities, not just for deaf people. So it means it's just operated by hearing people, but it's operated by deaf people as well. And we've been lobbying for many years and sending memorandums to Parliament. And in 2016, the 9 provinces of South Africa had a march, and they marched to plead with the to ensure that South African Sign Language is placed in the Constitution and to be recognized as a language. But we knew it was recognized, but we wanted it to be official. And the reason for that is to ensure that there's access to education, access to employment, access to government services, and so on and so forth, and a variety of access of services. And that is what we were lobbying for. In the Western Cape, just in terms of the Language Committee, it's the only legalistic official language committee who represents a variety of languages, i.e. English, Afrikaans, isiXhosa, and sign language. So I just want to commend the Western Cape for that, because the other provinces do not have that representation. And it's a great foundation that has occurred within the Western Cape. So I want to give honor to the Western Cape Language Board and also for PANSALP for establishing that within the Western Cape. I would also like to commend the South African Sign Language within schools as a subject, and it's been recognized as a medium of instruction, although the language has not been official in South Africa, but it's a medium of instruction as a subject within South African schools until matric. So we just want to commend that kind of work that has occurred in order for deaf people to have access to colleges and to universities. And also to various institutions, for example, the University of Stellenbosch and Hans Lab. This is how they sign it, Hans Lab. And Wits University, University of the Free State, University of the Northwest, those universities support South African Sign Language and have established sign language units and have been working exceptionally well. So we all work together. And within this month, we've got National Month of Deaf Awareness Month. So from the 1st until the 30th, so we haven't finished as yet. The theme is striving for the deaf community, is to ensure that we have people working together, and we've got various themes. And this week's theme is an appropriate theme. It's deaf arts and culture expressions. So various people who have poems in sign language or other artistic attributes, they are able to share that. And so with PANSALP, we will ensure that deaf people are represented and not just on the sidelines and have a hearing person doing it for them, and that we are not discriminated against. We want to work together in collaboration with one another. And as I speak, I do not speak for myself, but I speak for the entire deaf community as well, and representing the deaf community. And hence why there is a strong core within our blood in terms of deaf representation. In the past, we've had many webinars representing deaf people, and deaf people are required to make those kind of decisions. For example, if we had early childhood development for deaf babies, we've had a deaf person who would represent that. We've had MPs and members of parliament within our webinars. We've also had PANSALP, but a deaf representative there, a LGBTQ webinar as well, but deaf representatives there as well, and panelists there. So we wanted to ensure that we had deaf panelists and representatives to ensure that it's equal, regardless of whether they are hearing or deaf. We just wanted to ensure that there was inclusivity. And I'd also like to thank PANSALP and the various other provinces who have been working in partnership with us. I know that we've gone through our ups and downs, which is normal. And when we have those downs, we learn from those mistakes, and we ensure that we alter that. And whenever there are problems, we want to ensure that we resolve that. And that is my presentation for today, just a part of deaf awareness and a part of South African Sign Language. We are still striving and lobbying to ensure that South African Sign Language will be the official official language of South Africa. It is about to get there. We are close, but we thank our president that he will make it official. But unfortunately, because of COVID, it has been a bit delayed, and we just want to ensure that we sort out the terminology. But we've had wonderful webinars so far, and it's lovely to see that we ensure that the political structures and the terminologies are being changed, but it's close to being official. We really want it to be an official language in South Africa. We're looking at deaf leaders who have passed away, who have lobbied to ensure that it gets to this point in time. And we wanted them to see that it becomes an official language. So hence why we are still striving to ensure that it becomes an official language within South Africa for our deaf communities. And we thank you so much for watching.
Oh, no, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Java Mohammed, for that presentation. I know that it has been a long day. When we are here now, when we can have this great timeline and mention all the events that we've gone through to be where we are, we're very much grateful. And even to celebrate that we have a charter which can be accessible by each and every government department, by everyone, to know what deaf community mean and what is it that one needs to do to ensure that there is inclusive governance and access as well. So thank you very much for that. And you've also made us aware once more that it is a right and also it is heritage. Language is heritage and deaf people have their own heritage. Without wasting much time, let me allow Mr. Andres van Niekerk from NID, National Institute for the Deaf, to also do his presentation. He will also be sharing with us on Monday when we'll be doing our deaf awareness in Worcester Hospital. I just need to mention this one because there was a language complaint from one of the deaf people that they couldn't access COVID-19 vaccination because they were not allowed to bring in their interpreters for that service. So on Monday, we'll be doing that awareness to the community of Worcester Hospital, the doctors, the administrators, and all those people together with Mr. Andres van Niekerk. So let me give him his platform to do his presentation as well. Thank you so much, Mr. van Niekerk. Please take your platform.
Thank you, Dr. Mali. I appreciate the time to share a little bit. I have shared my screen. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Thank
yes.
you. So as Dr. Mali said, I am Andries van Niekerk and I work with the National Institute for the Deaf. And primarily my focus is South African Sign Language and everything around that. And as we know, language affects every part of society. So the work is very, very broad. In this instance, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it means to belong to a deaf community, a short summary of what South African Sign Language is, and then how the language unifies the deaf community. There we go. The deaf communities as a whole are identified by a sign language. And typically these communities are around a school for the deaf, typically. Not always, but that is primarily where we see that. And schools for the deaf are very, very influential. The future leaders of deaf communities are raised there. So it is quite obvious why there would be a deaf community around a school for the deaf. Interestingly enough, hearing loss is not a requirement to belong to a deaf community. We see that with CODAs, which are children of deaf adults. We see that with hard of hearing people who have sufficient hearing to understand spoken language, and then those who are profoundly deaf. The criteria is you have to have fluency in the sign language. and be accepted by the deaf community. So that's the requirement. You can't be fluent in a sign language and then never meet with deaf people, not have deaf friends, and expect to be part of the deaf community. So it's a whole package, but interestingly enough, hearing loss is not a primary requirement. The South African deaf community who use a sign language, the numbers vary. The South African census of 2011, with all of its challenges, I need to add that the census had quite some issues being accurate. But anyways, it recorded about 234,000 sign language users. And DEFSA has proposed 1 million sign language users when they presented to Parliament. The numbers aren't really accurate, but we don't know. It could be less, it could be much more. It's difficult to measure. Now, South African Sign Language is the sign language we use here. It's similar to other sign languages. It's a visual and spatial language. So the modality is vision. It's through sight, which is very different to what everyone is familiar with, which is a spoken language with the audible modality. The expression is not with the vocal cords in the mouth and the tongue and all of those features. The expression is with the body, with the arms, with the hands, and with the face. So it's very obvious that it's very different to spoken languages, very different. In spoken languages, for the most part, the language is sequential. You have to say one word, and then the next one, and then the next one, until you form a sentence. Sign languages is called simultaneous languages. Now, there is simultaneity in spoken languages, but very, very, very little. Primarily, sign languages are simultaneous. So with one sign, if you translate that to a spoken language, it would be a sentence, but it's one sign. So multiple meanings are conveyed at the same time. And in South Africa, we have quite significant variation in our lexicon, our vocabularies. And there is very good reason for that. I can't go into the reasons for that too much in this presentation, but suffice to say that our history with segregation, the geography, and the age of the deaf people, that has led to significant lexical variation. There's more than one sign for one concept. So for example, there's about 7 or 8 signs for blue. Colors typically have a lot of signs. And this is something that's typical in sign languages. It's not a matter of SSL being underdeveloped. If you consider British Sign Language, which is in a first world country, which is highly developed in terms of academia, in terms of policies, they have recorded 18 signs for purple, which is much more than I think we have. So that's not a reflection of the sign language being underdeveloped or anything like that. It's a sign of a very healthy and very alive language. So about the deaf community, unity is with the language. That's the central feature. But apart from that, the deaf community all share challenges. A barrier for one is a barrier for all. Everyone who is deaf experiences communication barriers. Everyone. Now that sharedness, that creates unity. But this barrier is frequently misunderstood. Communication barrier means I use a language that you don't use, and you use a language that I don't use. We don't understand each other's language. That is the barrier. It's a linguistic barrier. And the solution to that is simple, very difficult to implement, but simple. Learn the other language. For deaf people to learn a spoken language is incredibly difficult because there's no repertoire for the sounds. But for a hearing person to learn the sign language, it's much more doable. So the bridge has to be crossed from both sides, but it has to be built, one might say, with more effort from the other side. And this community has shared victories. South African Sign Language, as Jabbar said, has become a school subject. It's a home language in schools for the deaf. And DEFSA has fought long and hard for this because there are still many challenges with this implementation, with the school subject in schools for the deaf. Many, many challenges. We have teachers who aren't competent. What we see happening is that teachers are teaching signs in the classroom that's not used in the school by the children and by the community. So there are a lot of challenges still to overcome. But it is still a very great victory for the deaf community. And should SSL become an official language, the 12th official language, which it definitely will. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And as Jabbar also said, it's just a matter of getting it onto the agenda of the parliament. That's going to be another shared victory that the deaf community will celebrate. So that unity that we see is shared victories and shared challenges and one language shared by all of them. Despite the differences in gender and race and age, etc., there is still this one deaf community as I have explained. And they all fight, and when I say fight, I mean in different ways. DEFSA fights in a very specific way to better the lives of deaf people in the whole country. But the deaf person who goes to the hospital and demands a sign language interpreter has his own fight. The organization that approaches PANSALB and says there's a violation here fights their fight, and everyone strives towards an accessible South Africa for deaf people. In terms of preserving our heritage, it is very challenging because we don't have an orthography. There's no written form of South African Sign Language. There are several written forms, but none that have been accepted as this works. Video recording is the only method of documenting the language. And 200, 300, 400 years ago, quite obviously, we have no record of the language. Whereas with spoken languages, we have record thousands of years ago. So that's a big challenge. And that is something that anyone who attempts to document the language really needs to understand. I'm going to jump a little bit because I don't think I have too much time left. Language change is occurring at an incredible pace. If you consider spoken languages, and I heard a good example in Afrikaans, there's a word, draadloos. That word is not really used anymore. It has been replaced by the word radio. I can't think of another example in Afrikaans. In South African Sign Language, at the school here in Worcester, the Delabat School, the sign for dog has changed 3 times in the past 10 years, which is extraordinary. And the reason for this is a natural process of standardization that's occurring. The language community, they are selecting, this is the sign that we feel comfortable, and this is all subconscious. This is a sign that feels nice. It's easy to use in a sentence. It's easy to inflect, to add meaning to, and exposure to other signs is much more at a greater volume because of access to visual media, Facebook, WhatsApp video, and so on and so forth. So I want to conclude by really stressing that, as I said in the beginning, sign languages are very different to spoken languages. But what we see happening constantly is one blanket policy, one blanket piece of legislation that applies to languages. You can't do that. Spoken languages and sign languages are so different that you can't have one piece of legislation, one policy that applies to both. Inevitably, what happens is sign language gets pushed off the table because spoken languages are easier to manage. They are easier to implement, and sign languages are not. So they need to have very specific pieces of legislation and policies specifically for sign languages. And we've seen progress in that regard, specifically with the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, ICASA, and their new regulations. That has been a great step forward. Thank you very much for the time, and I really enjoyed the workshop, the webinar so far.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Niekerk, for that presentation, and also coupling it with the timeline that was given by Mr. Japa, and also with practical examples and tangible development in the use and also in the progress of South African Sign Language. I've also taken a leaf from your presentation when you mentioned natural process of standardization, which I think is something that we should also adopt in other languages as well, not to adopt by only looking at one method, but also looking at how and what the people want, what the people use, what is it exactly that is already available on the ground. So I really think that that is a very beautiful way of developing a language and also using a language depending on the users and the speakers. Our next speaker is from the Department of Education. She will, that is the Department of Education of the Western Cape, Ms. Nosisa Beile. Please take your podium name. Over to you.
Molweni betunana. Good morning, everyone. Happy Heritage Day. My name is Nosisa Beile. I'm the Deputy Chief Education Specialist of isiXhosa in the Western Cape Education Department. It's so sad that we are still at this time in our lives have a challenge, especially in African languages, that although the Constitution says that they are all official, we are still struggling in some areas of education in regards to our languages. But having said that, fortunately, we have a newly appointed DGG, Mr. Mohammed Haroon, who has taken upon in looking at the language policies across the Western Cape Education Department. And I think that will filter down to check the language policies at schools. Reason being is that we have noticed, as the people that are dealing with curriculum, that some of the challenges that our learners are facing is the language issue in terms of obtaining the metric results that are required for them to go to university. And we also noticed when we are analyzing the results that there are some of the challenges across our schools where you will find that the mother tongue speakers of African languages, when they go to maybe the former Model C schools, they are placed in or are forced to do English or Afrikaans as home language. And this has been going on for some time, and you'll find that these learners, they are struggling. And then when they are writing matric exams in the year, because the policy of the department allows the learner to change 2 subjects on the year when they're doing grade 12, they will be just forced to change and then do isiXhosa when they in the year of their matric, and it make them to fail. So we've been making a plea to the department to look at these schools that are having challenges in making sure that African languages are taught in the schools. So we are trying to get there. Fortunately, there is a committee that has been formed recently that they must look in these issues so that we really have to be fair to our kids in terms of the languages. The department also has established what is called language across curriculum. The language across curriculum means that we are trying to make sure that every teacher is a language teacher, whether the teacher is teaching a content subject, they must always within that content subject really look into languages, especially that we know that these learners have the language is the vehicle for them to understand the subject that they are being taught. It doesn't matter whether the language of teaching and learning is English or Afrikaans, but we also realize that the mother tongue language, whether it's isiXhosa, Afrikaans, is the foundation of the teaching and learning. Remember, in languages, we are teaching these kids skills, language skills. We are talking about listening and speaking skills. We are talking about reading and viewing skills. We are talking about writing and presenting skills. And we also have to look at the language structures and conventions. And if we taught these skills in the mother tongue of our children, we've realized that these will be the foundation or the basics of them so that they can be able to converse or maybe understand the content more in all areas of their education. So if we reinforce or try to teach them the basic in their mother tongue while they are at schools, this will help them to have what I remember Dr. Alexander usually said, that it will be an additive approach where they will add on the foreign language when they understand their language. Remember, if you are a child, I will talk about isiXhosa. As I said, I'm the language specialist, I'm isiXhosa deputy chief. The reason why you know that the head is head in English is because you first know that is inhloko in isiXhosa. The reason that you have impumlo and know that is nose is because you understand it first with your own language. So that's why we're saying that if these learners are taught the basics in their own mother tongue, it will be even more to understand other languages. One of the critical things that usually happen when we are teaching the language skills is that we expect our kids when they're being taught their listening and speaking, that while they are being taught in the class the language and speaking skill, they must be able to write their own notes. But you'll find that the teachers at this moment are still spoon-feeding children by giving them notes, while the learner, every time the child is listening to a teacher, the learner should be able to write their own notes, taking notes on what they are listening to. This will, and this has impacted them when they started at university, because at university, the lecturer will not give you notes. You have to own, while you are listening, you have to make your own notes. So we are encouraging this into teachers that they teach these skills appropriately so that it doesn't disadvantage our kids when they enter the tertiary institution. One of the other, the second one is that when our learners are doing the reading and viewing, they are looking at reading and viewing usually happens in the genres of isiXhosa, that is literature. They are doing it in poetry, they are doing it in drama, whether it's short stories, the novels and the folklore. And you'll find that if you look at those in those genres, that is where our heritage is there. You'll find that our learners, the language, you cannot divorce the language between the language and culture. And and people that pass this course at tertiary institution, they know that in the books of Ingumbo Yeminyanya, Okubandandazile, Okauka Kwembeleko, okubuzani kubawo, is where our learners learn how things were done before and the clashes between the Western and our own cultures. And if these kids are exposed to those books, they will be able to understand where do we come from? What are some of the things that we can carry while we are improving or maybe developing our languages? What are the aspects that we can carry on and see those that are not fitting in our current situation, but also taking those things that were good in our culture and take them forward. So those are the things that are lying for those books. And then secondly, while they are doing that skill, it means that these kids must be able to scan and skim. The vocabulary development happens when they are reading those books, because it's where they get words that they don't understand. They should be doing the vocabulary development. But at the moment, you'll find that our children cannot even answer or respond to questions at matric level because of those skills are not taught properly. They still struggle in interpretation of certain figure of speech because they don't understand. They cannot even understand where that figure of speech comes from, what were the impact of it in our culture. So we are trying to address those things even in our teacher development sessions that we have. We usually have teacher development sessions, especially in literature, because as we speak across languages in the Western Cape, the paper 2, that is literature, is still the paper that our learners are underperforming. And that is where our culture lies. It is in those genres that our culture lies, especially in the literature. We also have to, another skill is writing and presenting. This is the very, in our metric, this is the paper that carries a lot of marks because it's 100 marks, while the others are less than 100. And you'll find that in this paper, the learners are given topics that they should write about. Our learners are still struggling in even writing a story and their own stories, that when they're given a topic, they can be able to write their own stories, taking that topic and create a story. They're struggling with that because they still don't know how to plan. They don't know how to do mind maps and all those things. So that makes them an impact in their performance at metric level. One of the other things that is even worse is that our learners we've got what we called in the CAPS document that our learners are tested at using the taxonomies, whether it's Barrett or Bloom's taxonomy, where we check them across the cognitive levels if they understand, even if it's a visual text or a prose text. What is even worse is that our children don't understand, in fact, even teachers don't understand how that a cognitive level or maybe the instructional verb in a cognitive level is not a taxonomy. Instructional verb is not a taxonomy, but it is determining it is about on its own. It's not a taxonomy, but it is determined when in the context that is being used for. So if you are using the verb describe on its own doesn't mean anything, but what follows that verb is what the learner could understand, that this is an extent that I should respond to the question, or this is the level of difficulty that the question is in. So we are having those challenges that our learners, even our teachers, are struggling even when they are setting question papers, so that our children can know how deep they should go in answering those questions. But we are working on them. Fortunately, we've got a close relationship at the Western Cape Department of Education at the moment. There is DCS for isiXhosa, there is DCS for English, there is DCS for Afrikaans and isiSotho. At the moment, the isiSotho DCS has been given the platform to also help in the sign language. It's unfortunate that we haven't have anyone at the moment for the sign language, but we know that the Western Cape Education Department is one of in the province, in the Department of Education is one of having so many schools in grade 12 that are writing sign language. And we're grateful for that, but I think it will be great to have subject advisor, whether it's a subject advisor at the moment, so that those teachers that are teaching sign language can have somebody specializing in the language to help in the teacher development of those languages. So we're hoping that they are working on it. We are fortunate that the DGG has shown that he is interested in improving and also checking if our schools are in line with the Constitution in terms of the language policy. And also because I heard in the last meeting that we have that he already knew that Nama language is going to be taught at schools in the curriculum, but we know that it needs to people to work on it, but at least he's aware of what is going on. So really, language is an important part in our teaching. It has also disadvantaged our children. We know even at the current situation that at matric level, the questions are all in English and Afrikaans. It also means that all the African language learners at the moment are still struggling when they are reading question papers. Before they go to the content of the subject, they have to face the language barrier. Whereas it's even better, it's better for an English and then an Afrikaans whose mother tongue, to the learners whose mother tongue is Afrikaans and English, because the question papers are in English and Afrikaans. So we still have a long way to go so that our learners could understand. And it's if in fact, it has been proven that even if I still remember a lesson that was done in KZN, a physical science lesson that has been done across the world, that it was taught in English to the first year student and in English. And after the results has shown that the learners couldn't pass, it was taught in both English and isiZulu. And the isiZulu learners passed that lesson, the assessment based on that lesson in a higher performance when they were taught in their language. So it means we still have a long way to go, because currently, as we speak, we don't have in African languages texts that are written about technology. We know technology at the moment is something that is on. We don't have books on technology that are written in our own languages. We don't have books in our African languages that are dealing with the current issues that are facing, like technology, as we know, the physical science terms, as we mathematics. So we have a long way, especially African languages, so that our children cannot fall behind. It is not because they don't understand the content, it is because they have language barriers, and those issues need to be dealt with. I'm happy that at least we have Pencil, who is working so hard in making sure that they even help us in teacher development of our teachers to understand these issues, but we still need to, it's a long way to go, but at least I'm hopeful that the department now, the DGG, has been taken upon to look at those language policies at schools. So I hope we will do justice to our kids. But as I said, this language across curriculum is for every teacher, whether you are a language teacher or a content subject teacher. Because if we don't do what we're supposed to do in class, then it means we're failing these kids, especially for tertiary institutions. I thank you.
That was a mouthful, Mamubele. And the emphasis as well that language is core to every existence. We appreciate what is being done by the Department of Education. We know that you're not yet there, because when you're talking about even the numbers of teachers of the indigenous languages versus the numbers of the other official languages, there is a huge gap and there's a huge cry. And when we're talking about training and teacher development, there is still none in balance of those things. And then when we even bring in now the use and development of South African Sign Language is an added package. But we hope that with also participation by other NGOs and institutions, just for the benefit of the African child, there will be progress. Thank you so much, Ms. Beile, for that thoughtful presentation. So I will allow now the audience or our participants to engage our speakers and panelists. So I'm opening up the floor for questions, comments, inputs. We'll use the chat box and also the question and answer just there below in our screen for questions. Any questions, just use the chat box or raise your hand, then we'll be able to allow our panelists to respond. Okay, I know that we have 31 guests and participants in total, and it has been such engaging topics that were addressed here, and we must have comments and questions. Okay, without questions or comments, please allow me 1 minute for each panelist to say their closing remarks, just to cover up whatever aspect that you would like to cover. Okay, just before that, let me allow Luandile. His hand is up. Luandile, you can speak if you have access to the mic. If not, you can just jot down your question. Mr. Maswana, you can open your mic, or you just jot down your. Okay, colleagues, maybe still struggling. Let me give each panelist 1 minute. Just one comment, actually, not even a minute, just one comment each panelist. You can comment on either of the presentations or on your own, about your own presentation. Then after that, we'll go to the next item, the closing remarks.
Can I start, Dr. Mali, because I've got somebody, a family member who just got an accident, so maybe I will leave a bit earlier. What I wanted to also say is just wanted to add on what you said. We are having a challenge really in terms of having teachers specializing in African languages in both intermediate phase and senior phase. And that is a huge cry. I don't know whether in tertiary institutions, teachers don't take up African languages as a specialization, but at the moment, anybody who just speaks isiXhosa is just being thrown in teaching learners isiXhosa, even if that person is a math specialist. And it's got a huge impact when these learners are going up to FET phase, that is at grade 10 and up to 12. You can see that there is a huge backlog of not having content knowledge and also not having a developed language concepts. So we are really struggling. I don't know what happened, but in those two phases in education system, it's really bad. I don't know how we can cure that disease, but there's no teachers. There are no specialization in African languages. It's people are specializing, teachers are specializing in other content subjects. But you'll find that at schools, if the teacher is speaking isiXhosa, even if she's not specializing in teaching it, then she'll be thrown. And those children are getting a raw deal. And it always have a problem and an impact at the FET phase when they are getting to matric. So those are some of the challenges that we have, not having teachers specializing in African languages at the lower levels. So it's really a huge problem we are having.
Thank you very much.
As I said, we still have a long way to go.
It's just one answer, vetting. We're vetting police officers, so let's just vet teachers as well. Okay, I've just received a message, colleagues, from Prof. Khala, who is supposed to do the closing remarks. He's very much pressed with time. And according to our program, we're supposed to end at 11:10. Please accept my humble apology that I will not give you the other speakers the minute that I promised you that I'll give you, and just allow Prof. Khala to do the closing remarks. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mali and colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. The opportunity to say a word or two is highly appreciated. I think a lot has been said, which I would want to respond to, in my closing remarks. Let me start off by saying this is a very important engagement. I'm looking at the title here, which has been sent through, which begins to just working on two screens. My apologies for that. That is the importance of language in nation building and heritage preservation. And I can just highlight, two key words: nation building and heritage preservation, and make a statement that this reminds us of our champion, Dr. Neville Alexander. May his soul rest in peace. In advancing the idea of the language question, especially if I go through his work, you would hardly, see him finishing a piece without pointing out the issue of nation building. It comes across, even if he speaks about education, he speaks about multilingualism. There's bound to be somewhere, along the lines of his discussion, a note about the significance of nation building. And I think this is well thought through by those who have worked behind the scenes, putting together a program like this. Looking at the heritage element to it, one can, work it out and categorize this into both tangible and intangible heritage. And language obviously falls within the intangible category. And it's also interesting that you have, a partnership which is as big as this, and with Iziko Museum being part of this. Yesterday, we're talking about Robben Island being one of the key, heritage sites, which came immediately after 1994 as one of the declarations that took place in Parliament. And it's only fair to say museums should also be key stakeholders in an exercise like this. And we really appreciate, both PENSOLB and Iziko Museums. Iziko Museum being in the forefront of this developmental initiative. So I would like to acknowledge that. But that said, one would also like to acknowledge other important structures that are involved in this project. I do note that the University of the Western Cape is involved, which is also very important. And I listened very carefully, to Prof. Quintin Williams presenting, some of the important recommendations if we were to take, the language question to the next level. I also note that we have SUPU, part of this, collaborative relationship, which is very important. The Western Cape Language Committee is a very important structure in advancing the language question. I myself have been part of a structure like this in the past. And, I'm proud of what was achieved and what they continue to achieve, in the language debate and, advocacy issues, language advocacy in particular. I'm also noting, African style RAD, which is sort of considered as an important structure in taking the language question forward. You are recognized. The Indigenous Language Action Forum, ILAF, is another important structure that I would want to recognize, and I'm obviously part of that structure, and they are also, in the forefront of advancing the cause. The Western Cape government is also noted, particularly the Department of Cultural Affairs and Sport, which is keen, always keen to take the language issues, up there as and when the need arises. In fact, it's within their mandate, as far as I know. So that's very important to see them participating in such a collaborative relationship. The National Library of South Africa is also, underscored as an important structure that is involved in this partnership. Thank you very much. I do note that we have Swahili Language Board as sort of listed as a partner in this exercise. Whoever is representing the structure, well done. We also have, as I was listening to some of the speakers, DEFSA, the National Institute for the Deaf. These are very important structures that are also driving, the agenda that relates to the linguistic rights of our deaf community. I think there's a long history behind this, colleagues and friends, we know it. And I tend to agree fully that there shouldn't be a turning back. It's important that we have South African Sign Language as one of the official languages, speaking in constitutional terms. And I think there's been a long ongoing debate about this, and I think it's about time. So thank you very much for sharing with us, your issues and your plans and your struggles. Some of us do know the struggles, and I think little by little, some of these struggles will be overcome. Very important observations that have been made, from one speaker to the next. And I would want to sort of provide a brief synopsis of what I think, came out from these discussions. And I could do that in one sentence by suggesting that all the speakers have funneled down to a point which begins to suggest that if you lift the language, you lift the people. If you lift the language, you lift the people. I think that's what it means as I've been listening throughout, you know, the discussions. Now, from my understanding and reading of the South African linguistic infrastructure, the fundamentals are there. The fundamentals are there. I mean, if you look at our pieces of legislation, I mean, if you look at the Constitution, we have all the provisions that talk to the language question. So which begins to tell us that, honestly, the infrastructure is there. Now, the bigger question that we may want to ask, what is the holdup? What is holding us back from, you know, being practical about the implementation part? I think that's where the issue is. What is required for us to be in a position to say, izinto zibheka phambili, we can begin to see change? I mean, research in this area has been well documented. And we've been talking. I mean, I think we just need to get to a point of saying the time for slogans is over. It's been a long debate. You know, people come and go. The CEOs will come and go. The DGs will come and go. I mean, the ministers will come and go. And we continue to debate it. So I think it's time that we begin to see some practical implementation. We've seen, I don't want to say we've seen, you know, violations, linguistic violations, especially of our deaf community. And we've written about, you know, I've got two cases that myself, Russell Kachula and Zakira Dokrat, that we've written about. I'm talking about serious cases. Now, you can trace it neatly, nicely by saying, if you visit a police station today and you happen not to be able to speak the language that people speak, I mean, you belong in this one population of deaf people, across the country, no police station will assist you. I'm saying this from my understanding of my country. No police station will be in a position to assist you, you know, to take your case forward. And if you don't speak the language of record, which is English, I mean, Afrikaans being debated for whatever reason, I mean, by those who are sitting in the bench. So again, it then really put those who are not sensitized or who have no knowledge whatsoever in terms of the language of record in the receiving end. So the police officer will translate your statement into a legal text that is presented, you know, to the investigator. It ends up in court, and it's a layer of stories that end up before the presiding officer being a judge or a magistrate. And now reaffirming and looking at that story again when the trial comes 2 years later, it's a completely different story, let alone the fact that the story is written in a language that you don't understand. So these are very important questions about the right to a language and the right of a language. The right to a language being you having access to the language that is official, and the right of a language would then mean the right of a language to exist. And that existence means usage, equal usage across the board. So these are areas which are problematic in this country. So I think we're talking about that this morning. We're talking about the linguistic infrastructure which is there, but the implementation is problematic. Now, maybe I do pick up that Prof. Williams mentioned policy issues. My close friend, Ms. Ria Oliver, made reference to that as well. It would also mean that there has to be a way of interrogating, policies that should drive the agenda. Universities are struggling when it comes to implementing language policies. You ask the question and you keep on asking the question. Perhaps it's time for us to approach policy matters from a different angle. Problem, solution, character of policy making is required. Looking at policy as text, not just as an ordinary document, because as much as we provide space, starting with the Constitution, we keep on saying where practicable. That is a problem, because if it's not practical, it's not practical. And the practicality part of it talks to resources, for example, talks to the willingness, and it talks to all sorts of things. So it's all about making provision for language and immediately take the provision away by suggesting that where it is practical. So those who feel, or those who want to, trick us, will tell us that it is not practical. Then it ends there. Some of the judges that I've discussed this matter with, they always tell me, Mona, we understand the argument, but it is not practical. But it is practical for others, those who benefit from it. So I'm saying there might be a view that should come out strong. Say, well, we need to look at our policies and rework them in such a way that they are really delivering on the mandate. And we speak the intention practically now. I also take my hat off because this, as I mentioned earlier, the whole idea of nation building coming together like this is a positive signal. If you can have such diverse structures, highlighting the need, speaking to this very critical issue, it's a positive signal that we need this type of unity to take this matter forward. So that, for me, it's more of gathering momentum, which is required to take this forward. So well done to all of you. And of course, my suspicion is that the whole idea of being practical has never been so important. I get a little anxious when we keep on talking about slogans. I think that there has to be now a movement to the next level. Now, how do we get to the next level? I just want to highlight a few points. As I'm listening, as I was listening to you, I think the first practical part to this would be to take the issue of the provision of quality healthcare seriously. If we're talking about people's lives, and language being in the center of that. That any government department where we stand to benefit, and be provided with quality healthcare, language should be, one of the drivers to that. That's the first one. The second one, you've spoken about education from different angles, which is very important. So provision of quality and equal education can only be, achieved through the language that people understand. I mean, that has been well documented. Why do we move back and forth all the time when it comes to implementing? So this is something that has to be pushed to the next level. And some of us in our corners are doing just that. Perhaps the more the merrier. I mean, this bigger partnership is likely to go far, I think. Now, the third one would be the provision of linguistic human rights on a serious note. And I made reference to the issue of, the criminal justice system. So that's one area where you begin to pick up serious violations, especially in relation to our deaf community. And it's happening. I mean, I've got one or two cases that I can showcase that talk to this. And there has to be a way of looking at this and see to that our criminal justice system is sort of transformed. There needs to be a complete overhaul of our criminal justice. I mean, if we're talking about access to justice, what do we mean? Social justice, what do you mean? Without looking at the language question, especially within the criminal justice. So this is a very important question for me. The last one would be developing and learning a language for economic reasons. And tying it up with language is very critical. I can say more, but I see the chairperson is waving at me, and I think it's only fair to leave it at that. But again, thank you. I think we're likely to go further with some of these issues on the table. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Prof. And we are very grateful from the whole analysis and also your viewpoints that you've reflected on all the presentations. Thank you. Unfortunately, time is always against us, so we still need to add more of these debates. I will allow Dr. Conrad Steenkamp to please do the vote of thanks. While he is doing the vote of thanks, if you may please open up your mic so that we can also have some pictures of all our presenters before they leave. Over to you, Dr. Steenkamp.
Dr. Mali, I must admit that I'm very surprised here now, but I'll do my best. Yes, I've been able to observe how the various parties have organized this whole thing, and it is clear to me that took a lot of effort. There's a large number of speakers. It was not an easy event to organize. I can't name all of them by name. I'm not even going to try and do that. And I'll therefore keep it very short. On behalf of everybody, all the panelists, the large number of people out there that are listening, thank you very, very much. This has been an extremely interesting discussion. So thank you, Dr. Mali, and Ezekiel, everybody who was involved in this. Over and out.
Thank you very much, Dr. Steenkamp. Can we please switch off our videos and then we can leave them one by one? Just for a pictures to be taken by the organizer. Okay, okay. Prof, please, Mr. Faniker, please, your video, if you're comfortable, of course. Okay. Okay, I guess that's it then, colleagues. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And have a great one.